Hey everybody, JTO here, obviously. Now, as a couple of people probably know, I've done a couple of different public talks in a park in Vancouver called Grandview Park, which I'm going to be continuing to do, not necessarily in the same location, but I'll be probably once a month going out in public somewhere and giving, a short little rant, a little talk. And I did the second one yesterday on Sunday. And the first one was unintentionally funny because it rained so heavily that everybody got totally soaked, including me, and I was freezing cold by the end. The second one, though, there was a parade that formed off camera, like within microphone range of where I was speaking. And so as I'm speaking, you can hear this marching band playing louder and louder and louder. And I'm like trying to get louder so that the microphone doesn't get washed out and you can't hear me. Anyway, here's the audio of that talk. So when we talk about human rights, especially when we do so in opposition to other people's opinion, there is a temptation and an established trend to use the term human rights. In fact, this becomes more pronounced when the argument drills down to things as basic as free speech or freedom of association or freedom of assembly, while some overzealous social justice types may try to shout us down, or use megaphones to silence us, or tear down posters promoting our ideas or asking what we think are interesting questions. But the temptation is always to stand on the idea of human rights, if for no other reason than because so-called human rights is the flag under which those who oppose our free speech practice their particular brand of censorship or coercion. In fact, human rights laws in the Canadian Charter and in international law seem like an appropriate framework to protect an unpopular minority opinion from censorship and other violence. But the rights we're talking about are properly called civil rights, not human rights. And there's a few important differences in the two different frameworks. Civil rights, which is what we're talking about when we discuss equal treatment in the courts, or the right to expression or peaceful assembly, are framed within the context that limits the power of government to interfere in the lives of people using violence or force or redistribution of money. And by contrast, human rights as a legal framework provides justification for governments to become violent or coercive or to interfere in your life, using bankers or social service workers or armed enforcers. But everybody loves the idea that it is a universal absolute, that you and me and some Jews and gypsies all share a right not to be rounded up and murdered in a death camp. Seems like a very attractive notion. The right to not be persecuted. That's a human right, and I'm a human, so my rights are human rights, right? Well, I used to think this, but it's wrong. In fact, it's not just wrong, it's stupid, because it's a strategy guaranteed to fail. So, saying it's stupid, I say that with full admission and knowledge that 2 years ago I hung posters up and down Commercial Drive by the hundreds, which had the tagline on them, men's rights are human rights. But they're not human rights. Because although a biologist might object to the claim that men are not human, in social reality, which is where these things matter, men are not the human beings that you are looking for. Move along. The United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights doesn't anywhere in its language say so, but the rights encoded as universal are only for a select majority. Yes, I said majority, not minority. And guys, you are not the majority. Those human rights that keep getting talked about are for oppressed people. Women, for example, are principal among those protected by human rights laws internationally and in Canada, and I'm aware that one or two people might object to the idea that women are an oppressed group, since they're, a numerical majority. They're defined as oppressed, though, in law. And that's what human rights law is good for. It's for defining who is oppressed, and obviously who is oppressing them, defined in law. In fact, human rights laws have no utility at all. They have no purpose unless a defined class of oppressors exists. And if it doesn't exist, then human rights law creates an oppressor class. And the utility of that law, once you've created an oppressor class, is to empower governments to act against the oppressors. It's a job they take very seriously, because it makes the organized use of force appear to be noble. Now, women-only shortlists are used because women are an oppressed class. And a man competing for a job or a seat in a classroom who gets moved to the bottom of the list or passed over or excluded is done to him because he's a member of a class of oppressors and patriarchs and tyrants. Now, I might need to repeat that. In the practice of human rights law, we have assumed a social class oppression exists. And to compensate for that oppression, we have created essentially an actual oppression using the designated bad guy class as the target for negative discrimination. And human rights really did seem at first to be a good idea. But you need an oppressor class, or a villain demographic, for this kind of sleight of hand to work. For human rights to have any legal utility, you don't even need a real victim, but you do need a bad guy. And when we pursue our rights, free speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, equal representation in the courts, and we use human rights as the umbrella to do that, we are asking the public to treat women as the bad guy class. Does anybody actually think that a mainstream social narrative is going to put women in the role of being the bad guy? Barbar, if you're watching, please put your hand down. But human rights needs a bad guy. Even where the simplistic model of good guy and bad guy doesn't actually exist, human rights laws create a designated class of bad guy, and it's already been decided that the bad guy is you. Women are not only our culture's established, recognized, and permanent victim demographic, they are also the spenders of 80% of disposable income. And they're the numerical majority of the population and the majority of the voters. So who here thinks that any corporation or politician, or at least successful politician, is going to offend the most powerful voting bloc or the most powerful spending bloc? It's women who are the demographic to be rescued in human rights law, or protected, or giving a helping hand by government in the mode of rescue. And of course, it's never censorship. It's never censorship when one group is silenced and another group is given voice, because given voice is where we see heroism. The necessary silencing of somebody not in the victim demographic disappears from our view. And this is why human rights law is not going to work for you. If you're not already listed in human rights law as a victim demographic, you're named instead as the villain or as the oppressor class who must be protected from. But if you're the victim class, then the fictional nature of your victimhood should already be clear. Wow, that's what I'm competing with? That's awesome. If we somehow flipped the script and changed both law and social expectations, and took a group now designated the oppressor class, making them a class in law named in convention as protected by the organized forces of human rights law, we would still be stuck inside a framework requiring good guys and bad guys, because human rights law does not work at all unless you have a class of oppressors. And even when the oppression practiced by them is only oppression in a political narrative and not in reality. The idea that everybody should be free from discrimination, exclusion of employment or education is a very nice idea. They're getting louder, I'm going to get louder. But in practice, what we're doing is empowering governments to use force against whoever the political narrative decides is a bad guy to rescue somebody else. Whoever the political narrative decides... It's really hard to read against that. And that doesn't work unless you create a class of evildoer. And the framework also starts from the assumption that people are fundamentally rotten and will screw each other over based on tribe if we don't have a parent in the form of government pointing guns at all of us. And if we actually aren't such violent and tribally minded imperialists, then the framework of law we create under the banner of human rights puts us on one side or on the other side of a hostile social strata. And by contrast, civil rights do not require anybody to be designated the enemy. And that's